Hey everybody, so sorry about starting the late stream, or the live stream a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties, we were out reviewing cars, etc., so all that piled on to make this event happen just, well, a lot later than I thought. What we were testing today was the Hyundai Ioniq plug-in hybrid and then the Kia Forte GT. We also have up there the Toyota Highlander hybrid and the Jeep Gladiator Mojave, of course. So coming up this week on our upcoming videos, it looks like, let's take a peek what we have coming down the pipeline here. We have a number of videos completed and waiting for uploads. We have Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport. We have the Mercedes-Benz GLC 300, the GLS 63 AMG. We'll also be talking about the entire Mercedes GLS lineup there. We have the CLA, the GLB, whole bunch of different Mercedes models going on there. And some truck stuff, and another towing torture test on the RAV4 hybrid. So we took the RAV4 hybrid from sea level up to over 7,300 feet, and it did not disappoint. So it definitely towed a 2,000-pound load up that hill without an absolute problem. So let's go to the questions here. And word of warning, we are going to try and keep this to an hour tops. I have things to do, unfortunately. More cars to film. Let's see here. How similar do you think the 2021 Rogue and 2021 Outlander will be? We don't know yet, but the new Rogue definitely looks pretty good. I have to admit, the exterior is not departing from its previous shape too much, but the interior looks really, really tasty, I have to say. Hopefully I can actually find a picture of the 2021 Rogue here to share with the people that have not seen it yet. But the interior design looks really, really good. So moving along here, what are thoughts on Peugeot cars? I think that Peugeot, I don't think they're ever going to really come back to the US at the moment. I like quirky French cars as long as they're still actually quirky. And that's one of the things that's made me sad, I think, about some of the French cars that you see out there. They're just not as odd as they used to be. And that's something that I think would be interesting if they came back. Let's see here. Michael's asking, are German cars unreliable? Do they need to be leased? It depends on how you look at this. So when you look at Consumer Reports ratings, not all European cars are at the bottom of the pack, but you should also remember that when we're talking about luxury cars, especially I would say luxury cars, the more features you put on your luxury car, the more likely it is to be unreliable. So it really depends on exactly what reliability means to you. If you are interested in the absolute most reliable thing, then you should be looking at a car that hasn't changed in a while, whatever that brand may be. And that's probably going to be where reliability will be highest. But if you want the latest features, if you want massaging seats or active high beams, if you want the most powerful engine options, the newest transmissions, etc., then probably that's going to be less reliable than something that's been around a while. That's the key thing to remember there. So let's see here. German cars start to have major issues around 80,000 miles and maybe very expensive. Again, it depends on what you're looking at. So, if you're looking at a German car with all the latest and newest features, then certainly there's a less proven reliability track record on those features. But once features like autonomous braking and some of the more advanced safety features that we see, once they've been around for 5 or 10 years, most of the kinks tend to be worked out of those systems. It just tends to be the newer, more forward thinking features that tend to have those reliability issues later. Let's see here. Ganesh is asking if we foresee the Harrier being launched in the US. Unless the Harrier turns out to be the Toyota Venza, then no. So Toyota has said that the Venza will be coming to America and that it will be hybrid only when it lands. Now, whether that ends up being the Harrier or something different, we don't know, but it's probably not going to be two models in that segment. It's going to be just the one. The last time they brought a two-row mainstream midsize crossover to the US, it didn't sell well. And in general, that category does not sell as well as compact crossovers like the RAV4. So the likelihood of bringing two models in that segment is really low, to be honest. Let's see here. Did they stop making the Venza due to poor sales? They did. I didn't think they were that poor. However, mind you, sales in that segment, as I said, are always below compact crossovers, it seems to be, regardless of what year we're looking at. But for a company like Toyota that likes to make extremely high volume vehicles, then any car that sells in 20, 30,000 units a year is going to be a low volume vehicle. So let's move on here. Any info on the Jeep Compass Limited and Trailhawk? Are they truly changing the body style? Not that we know of. So the Grand Cherokee and Cherokee may be getting a refresh more than the Compass. Compass is unlikely to change significantly. We will be getting a 2020 Compass, probably the Compass Limited, about next month or so, sometime around the end of May for a full review. So let's see here. Next question. Nathaniel's asking, is Scotty Kilmer a scam? Ooh, that's a really loaded question. I would say no. He's not a scam. But obviously different people have different attitudes when it comes to reliability and new car dependability. I would also remind you that Scotty Kilmer in general is not talking about new cars. He's generally focusing on cars that are older and reliability is more known, which is definitely an important factor. And when I'm reviewing cars, I'm reviewing new cars where reliability is not known. And that's how we can end up with vehicles like, a Honda Civic that doesn't have as sterling of a reliability reputation as it once did. Or we can have, Toyota models like the CHR that somehow ended up dead last in its segment according to Consumer Reports as far as reliability. Past reliability is not always a predictor of future reliability unless nothing has changed. So generally speaking, if the car has no major mechanical changes year on year, then you could logically extrapolate and say that the previous 3 years reliability metrics and 3 years ago reliability metrics would apply. But if we're talking about a brand new vehicle, then that gets an awful lot trickier. So moving along here, see, what budget electric car do you recommend? Depending on the area of the country you live in, this will vary, obviously, because there are large areas of the country where your only option would be a Chevy Bolt. And if that describes you, then obviously get a Bolt. Outside of that, I would actually probably go for the Kia Niro. That's been a really great, small, practical, budget-focused EV. It still has the full federal tax credit available to it as well, and that's not something that we see in Teslas. Or if you're looking for something with a little bit more sporty potential, honestly, a Model 3 is not a bad deal. As long as you stick to the base models, you don't get too crazy with options, then they might be able to be considered a budget electric car. But remember, they're not going to qualify for any federal tax incentives anymore. Let's see here. How come Buick stopped making the LaCrosse? Simply because it didn't sell. The Buick LaCrosse was a very slow seller. It was being built in a factory with other slow sellers, and General Motors was trying to cut costs, and that's one way definitely to cut costs there. Elliot's asking about the F-150 spy shots. They do look good. We'll be interested to see what that really looks like when it finally comes out, and we'll see. So let's see here. Thanks, Matthew, for super chatting us there. So how quickly will Toyota spread RAV4 Prime Tech onto other models? That is a good question. I would assume, based on Toyota's track record here, not quickly. So if you are looking for a RAV4 Prime powertrain in anything else other than perhaps the upcoming Venza, I would say it's relatively unlikely. Based on the general design of the Highlander, for instance, it's unlikely that we'll see a Highlander Prime. There's nowhere to stick a bigger battery pack unless they eat up a lot of cargo room or remove the third row. And I'm not sure if anybody would want a 2-row Highlander Prime. Theoretically, that's where the Venza would come in. So Venza would have enough cargo room in the back, according to the designs that we've seen, to have a Venza Prime model. It's also possible that we may see some other Prime model in the future, perhaps, maybe, and this is really a stretch, a Camry Prime would also have the kind of room on the inside to handle that kind of battery pack. But it's highly unlikely that we will see anything along those lines, performance-related plug-in hybrid, outside of the Lexus brand anytime soon within Toyota. So if you're looking for something like that, then I would definitely RAV4 Prime while you can. Let's see here. Down to Forester versus CRV purchase. Thank you for the super chat there for Sir Frederick. Can you tell me a few things that you don't like about each, and I may have overlooked, and what you like most about each? Oh, interesting question. Let's go with the Forester first. So the Forester is a great buy, especially if you're looking at base trims and you want all-wheel drive. So value-wise, there is almost nothing that can beat Forester down there at the lower end of the spectrum. Um, the Forester also has a pretty roomy interior, decent ground clearance, and overall decent off-road performance, although it's not best in the segment by any stretch. Let's see, CRV. CRV is, I think, a very well-rounded crossover. It's not as exciting as some. It doesn't excel in any one area perhaps as well, but it's comfortable, it's well put together. But I think the CRV really excels when it comes to the hybrid system. So the new hybrid is definitely going to be very efficient compared to the Forester. It also is going to be as off-road capable, essentially, as the Forester due to its mechanical all-wheel drive system design. And I think that the CRV I like better in top-end trims. The problem with creating such a great value at the bottom end is that every manufacturer has to cut corners, and maybe that's not the best way to say that exactly, but it's a fact of life that you have to make decisions when building a vehicle. Do I spend money here? Do I spend money there? And by giving us standard all-wheel drive and some of the other standard features we find on the Forester, they have to take away from other areas of the vehicle. Sound deadening, the suspension doesn't come across as quite as refined, etc. The engine definitely, it feels a little bit less refined. My Apple Watch is talking to me. There's certain areas of the vehicle that aren't as refined, and that's not a problem in the base model. But if you're looking at a fully loaded model, then all of a sudden I think that's a bit more of a problem. And so when taking a look at very top end trims of the Forester versus especially entries like the CX-5 where we get a turbo, or the Honda CR-V where we have a nicely appointed interior and a hybrid system, then I would say the Forester starts to fall apart a little bit. So thanks for that question there. Let's move on to the next super chat here. GLS, thanks for that. Would you go for a daily driver, a family car, a G70 2.0T manual, or Accord 2.0T manual, and why? Ooh, that is a interesting question. And GLS, GLHS, let me know down there in the comment section if you have kids in child seats, because I think that is the big differentiator there. If you have children in child seats, then I would Accord. And the main reason is roominess of the interior. So the Accord has a lot more legroom. Anytime you're comparing front-wheel drive car to rear-wheel drive car, packaging efficiency is incredibly important. And interestingly enough, this is one of the reasons that I'm a little bit concerned about Mazda's future and the Mazda 6 going rear-wheel drive, is that especially something that has an overall form factor designed for an inline six engine, you lose a lot of interior room. And even though the G70 was designed just for V6s and inline fours, an inline four longitudinally is an awful lot longer than an inline four transversely, and that's going to mean less room on the inside. So that would be the big differentiator for me. And outside that, if you aren't having children in child seats, then I would get the G70 for the luxury look. I do like the look of the car. It definitely feels very premium, and I like the way that it drives an awful lot more. I think an interesting midpoint here would be the Kia Stinger. Even though we don't have the manual transmission in the Stinger, I would say definitely put that on your shopping list, because we have a lot of the practicalities that you get in the Accord, the size of the Accord really on the inside, and a big trunk, but you also get the 2-liter turbo and rear-wheel drive driving dynamics, and longer warranty. Warranty is definitely a good reason to look at the Genesis as well. Moving along to our next super chat, thanks for that, R. London here. Do you really think Infiniti will disappear as a brand? I disagree with anybody that says Infiniti is going to disappear. I think that Infiniti and Nissan are too entrenched in America. They never gained traction in Europe, so it was more logical that they exited there. But I think that if nothing else, as a face-saving measure, they will continue on in America. I just really tend to wonder what their future will be. If their future ends up being Acura, which, people give Acura a lot of crap, but Acura in large measure is successful. Outside of the RLX, the ILX, the TLX, the MDX, the RDX, they actually sell well in their segments overall. They're by no means bottom basement in sales numbers. So being so closely related to other Honda models helps keep development low. The Honda and Acura PR teams are very, very conjoined. It's like when I talk to the PR person that I usually talk to at Honda, the Acura person is literally 2 cubicles down from them. They share a lot of the event teams together. Everything is definitely very, very conjoined. And that is not the model that we see at Lexus or Infiniti or Genesis. We see them playing much more separate. Infiniti is arguably much more closely related to Nissan than the others, but still far, far more separated than Acura. So will that separation continue, I think, is the more true connection or true question, or will it get better integrated into the Nissan envelope for greater savings? Personally, I hope that they don't do that with Infiniti. Infiniti does have a lot of product coming down the line. We do know that the QX60 is getting redesigned. We know that there's a QX55 coupified crossover coming. And we know that there are a number of new electric vehicles and hybrids coming soon. So with all that future product and the personnel changes that I know have happened recently at Infiniti, I don't think they're going anywhere. They just recently hired some new global marketing people, etc. But will the product come soon enough? Will it be enough to really resurrect the brand? That I think we won't know for a while. So moving along here to one of the newer questions here. Do we think the Chevy Bolt EV is a good vehicle? So Blue, that's a tricky question. I don't dislike the Bolt, but I personally think the Bolt is uncomfortable for me. So I think that would be my biggest consideration, is if you sit in the Bolt's driver's seat and you find the seat comfortable, then I have no problem with the Bolt at all. The EV drive system is unquestionably well designed. General Motors spends an awful lot of cash on the construction and design of their EV systems. We saw that in the Volt. We see that in the Bolt as well. So cooling, battery lifetime, etc. Absolutely top notch in the Bolt. The problem that I have with the Bolt in my head is one, styling. So if you like the look, that's fine. But in my head, I find the styling a little bit funny. And then the second problem is just overall seat comfort. If they just gave me a more comfortable driver's seat, I would have absolutely no problem at all. So definitely keep that in mind. Thanks for the super chat here, Destin. So why are Buick and GMC so often conjoined? That is an excellent question, and one that I have never truly understood. The logic inside the General Motors window is that Buick and GMC are both upgrades over Chevy, and the Chevy brand is a conjoined truck, SUV, and car brand. And classically, Buick was just cars, now it's cars and crossovers, and GMC is classically trucks, and now trucks and crossovers. So in a weird sort of way, it makes sense for those two brands to be on the same dealer lot together, because they don't have too much internal competition. There's obviously some, but you can also see that GM has really decided to try and limit that cross-shopping, since the dealers are together. And it kind of makes sense that if someone wants to upgrade from a Chevy into something nicer, that you have a separate dealer network, and then they have the choice of cars, trucks, and SUVs within that same dealer network. But on the same side, I've always wondered why GM plays it so separate with GMC. I also understand why they would never do this, but I would love to see a truck launch event where they had the Silverado and they had the Sierra there, and they talked about them together rather than pretending they're separate, because that's always awkward. So show me both trucks, show me the features that are different, show me the features that are the same, and then tell me how they're targeting different people. Who are they targeting differently? That I would find more useful than the way they do it now. Right now, they do a launch event for a Silverado, and then they do a launch event for a Sierra, and then they pretend they're completely different vehicles, and they're absolutely not. I also think it's a little bit odd that they haven't differentiated the engine lineup. You know, we can get the big engine in the Silverado, and you can get the tiny engine in the Sierra, and I think that's a little bit awkward. I would have liked to have seen Sierra have different options, especially when you go to these events and General Motors brags that that their GMC brand has a higher average transaction pricing than most European luxury brands. So when you look at and that's true across the truck lineup, mind you, but when you take a look at GMC, they do have a really, really heavy split of their sales in their Denali trims. And as a result, the average GMC that is sold has a higher price tag on average than the average Audi sold. So, with that in mind, I would like to see them further that. So, someone here was asking about FCA and curb weight. Why do we think that FCA vehicles have higher curb weights than other vehicles? That is an interesting question. The prime reason that we see higher curb weight in certain FCA vehicles, and this primarily affects their crossover lineup, I should say, is because of their dedication to off-roading. So when you take a look at a Grand Cherokee, a Cherokee, the Compass, the Renegade, that quartet of off-road crossovers, you have to have a much sturdier unibody in order to be able to take your unibody off-road. And Jeep has designed their vehicles so you can take them in severe off-camber situations. So we have a lot more wheel articulation. We have things like the disconnecting sway bars in some of those models. We have adaptive air suspensions. We have two-speed transfer cases, all that kind of stuff. So we have heavier duty components that add extra weight, that requires more structure. So that is one factor there. For instance, if we take a look at a Jeep Cherokee, it has a two-speed transfer case, and that adds extra weight that you don't find in a RAV4. So not only do we have to add extra structure to carry that capability, but we then also have to add extra structure to increase the rigidity over what you'd find in a RAV4, increase that off-roading ability. And then that kind of translates into some of their less off-road focused models. Like the Durango is not necessarily an off-road focused three-row crossover, but because it is so closely related to the Grand Cherokee, it inherits a lot of that weight from the structure of the Grand Cherokee, since the Durango is really just a stretched Jeep. And that's why we see like Grand Cherokee and Durango being really quite heavy when you compare them to Ram 1500. My Durango is actually heavier than a comparable 1500 with the same 5.7 liter V8. There are certain relative weight efficiencies, I guess you would say, in certain modern vehicle designs that we don't see in those older designs. So if you made the unibody out of aluminum, then it could be a lot lighter with similar structural qualities. If you had more modern high-strength steels and more modern steel bonding techniques, then you could make the monocoque a lot lighter as well. And of course, if you used more modern hydroformed rails, you could make a body-on-frame vehicle lighter. With a lot of factors going into that, age of design and off-roading would be the primaries there. So let's see here. Shamil is asking, thoughts on dynamic fuel management in GM's V8s? Does it make a meaningful difference when highway driving? I really, really love DFM, I have to say. That is one of the most intriguing new vehicle fuel-saving technologies that we've seen in some time. It was not designed by GM. Kind of interesting trivia here. So it was not designed by GM, and it was not designed by Delphi. Both of those companies ended up licensing it from the same company that originally developed the technology. And what's going on here is very different than cylinder deactivation, or what they call AFM, or cylinder skipping, or cylinder deactivation, or active displacement management, what some of the other companies call. Basically, the technology that Mercedes, FCA, GM, and a number of other manufacturers use, where they turn off the same cylinders every time. Honda has also used this in their V6 engines. So rather than turning off, say, cylinders 1, 3, 5, and 7 every time, the GM dynamic fuel management system will skip cylinders in patterns. And this helps keep certain vibrations out of it. When you have an engine that is properly balanced for 8 cylinders to be firing, and suddenly half the cylinders are off, you get odd cylinder harmonics, odd exhaust harmonics. So you have to change the way the exhaust system functions and is designed. And you can also get some strange vibrations. This is why none of those engines will do that at idle. So essentially no cylinder deactivation, modern cylinder deactivation system will deactivate cylinders while you're idling because of that kind of odd harmonic and odd vibration you can get. But by skipping cylinders in patterns, you can effectively cancel these out. So you skip cylinders in a pattern that creates a vibration, and then the next cycle you skip cylinders in a way to cancel that vibration out. So you're always attempting to create a smoother engine and still skip cylinders. It does have a positive effect on overall fuel economy in the highway. GM's pickup trucks are incredibly efficient, really, for a large pickup truck out on the highway. The 5.3 empty, a Silverado with the 5.3 and a mid-level configuration has no problem at 65 or 70 miles an hour getting nearly 30 miles per gallon out on the open highway. And the 6.2 is only a little bit less efficient. Now, interestingly enough, when we look at what FCA did, instead of trying to adapt that cylinder skipping technology to their existing engine, they broadened the ratio where you can disable the same cylinders, and then they added active weights to try and counteract that harmonic vibration. And we get a very similar fuel improvement, actually, in the Ram 1500 and the Silverado 1500. So that's kind of intriguing. Which version is better? It's kind of a tricky one. I would say that the GM1 probably is better overall because it results in a lighter weight engine, and we have added mass for the active mass modules in the Ram 1500. But interestingly enough, in fuel economy tests, they both see relatively similar fuel economy improvements. So that's kind of interesting there. Let's see here. Heard some rumors that a diesel Expedition might come. It would make sense. Have you heard anything? I haven't heard anything specific. I've also heard some rumblings. It wouldn't be a surprise as long as Ford can make enough of those engines. That would be the key thing there. I think that Ford may also take a wait and see approach to see how that engine actually sells in the Expedition. The main reason for doing that would be corporate average fuel economy numbers, and the Expedition is not too bad in that category thanks to its turbocharged engine lineup. Even though in the real world you may get lower fuel economy numbers, when we're talking about designing for fuel efficiency standards, we're not talking about real world numbers, we're talking about EPA numbers, and that is critical to keep in mind. So Craig Matheson, thanks for the super chat there. I want to shout you out for that one. And then let's go ahead and dig here for another comment here. Someone was driving their grandmother's Pacifica Limited, and some woman was trying to beat me on the highway in her Durango GT. That's an interesting pairing. Let's see here. Why is Chevy Bolt not sold in many European countries? That is an interesting question. I am not quite sure why they don't sell it everywhere. Mainly, I would guess it would be battery supplies. Remember that battery supply generally is limited in the world. Everybody has a battery supply issue. So that's why we're only going to see, I think it's about 60,000 Ford Mustang Mach-E's in the first model year of the vehicle. It's also why we see relatively low production targets for things like the Polestar 2, the Mercedes, the BMW, plug-in hybrids, etc. There are only so many batteries to go around. And this is kind of a tricky thing because not every battery factory is running at full steam. And so this is a combination of raw goods, shipping constraints, actual production constraints, production in the right spot constraints. So just because there's a battery factory somewhere doesn't mean it's going to be the right battery factory for you. Lithium-ion batteries, remember, are used in all manner of consumer electronics devices. So my laptop that's right next to me, my cell phone, my Apple Watch, all of these things have consumed batteries that could be used in something else. So that's kind of why we see that there. Potato Cannon. So why doesn't Volvo have rear-wheel drive vehicles? Seems to be popular with luxury cars. I'd love a rear-wheel drive V60. Interesting question there, and there's a very good reason why Volvo doesn't do rear-wheel drive vehicles. It all has to do with crash test safety. So in general terms, all else being equal, and this is a really tricky topic to cover here when it comes to safety, but all things being equal, if that was possible, having a transverse engine is safer because the engine is not going to intrude on the passenger compartment as likely. So, think about it. If this was an engine and this is the firewall in the vehicle and this is an inline engine, you're pushing against it this way, there's a much sharper contact point. But if you had the same engine turned this way and you push it into the firewall, then you're going to get a lower specific load in that one area there. That's the main reason that Volvo does that. Now, obviously, there are plenty of safe rear-wheel drive vehicles out there. Mercedes, for instance, has a ton of rear-wheel drive vehicles, and they crash test incredibly well. Mercedes also has a dedication to safety. But again, all things being equal, it is easier, and theoretically, you're going to have a safer vehicle when you have a transverse engine because there's more crush room there. Now, Volvo does and has made rear-wheel drive vehicles in the past, and oddly enough, I would not be surprised if Volvo actually moved back to rear-biased vehicles because of their push towards electrification. And that's something that we see, for instance, in some of their new plug-in hybrid vehicles. 400 horsepower, obviously 300 horsepower is coming from the front, 100 horsepower is coming from the back in the current generation. But when we take a look at some of their battery electric vehicles, we see a very balanced power figure. And we see definitely some rumblings that they may consider making rear-wheel drive electric vehicles or rear power-biased electric vehicles. It is also entirely possible that future plug-in hybrid vehicles could, say, have 200 horsepower up front, 200 horsepower in the rear, or 300 horsepower in the rear. There's no particular reason that you couldn't. So I would not be surprised if that happened in the future, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. The SPA platform and the other platform, whose name I have completely forgotten here, they have both been designed for electrification and for front-wheel drive applications. So you could have a rear-wheel drive electric option, but you cannot have in that platform a rear-wheel drive gasoline option. It just was not designed for it. Let's see here. So moving along here, Honda Ridgeline, GMC Canyon, or Ford Ranger. Ooh, that is a tricky one. I like the Honda Ridgeline, but the Ridgeline has a few problems going for it. Perception being the biggest one, to be perfectly honest. The Ridgeline is all the truck that 95% of half-ton shoppers really need, but very little of what they actually want. And that is kind of a problem. So, obviously the Honda logo is part of that. Honda's not a truck brand, so taking your Honda to a truck meet where you've got the Chevy bros and the Dodge bros, that's not going to be really a thing. It also doesn't have an 8-foot bed. It doesn't have a V8. It doesn't have a low-speed, two-speed transfer case. It doesn't have low ratio. Doesn't have locking differentials. But the vast majority of Americans never use those things, so it's not really a problem there. It is definitely the pragmatist's truck, I would say. And if it could tow more, I wouldn't mind getting a Ridgeline. If the Ridgeline could tow 7,500 pounds, maybe 8,000 pounds, I would have bought a Ridgeline instead of the Durango because I like the concept of that truck. It just unfortunately doesn't have that kind of tow rating. I, at the moment, would probably lean towards the Ford Ranger thanks to its 2.3-liter turbo. I really like that engine and the 10-speed automatic transmission. GMC Canyon's a great deal if you get the base engine, I would say. Moving along here to our next super chat. So Robbie R, thanks very much for the super chat there. And let's move on to another question here. Any Audi reviews coming down the pipeline? That's a good question. Yes, but we don't know exactly when. They have a number of new models that we will be testing. I was actually invited, unfortunately, to go drive the new Audi Q7 and the new S4. Unfortunately, there was a Volkswagen event that was right on top of the Audi event, and I just could not go to both at the same time. So I was very, very sad about that. But hopefully we will definitely get those models in for testing here soon. Moving along here, how eager are we to test the new 2022 Mazda 6 when it comes out? I am super, super, super eager about the new Mazda 6. But I'm also a little bit concerned, as I said before. So I'm eager because giving us a value alternative to the Kia Stinger, which is I really think the Mazda 6 is going to be a Kia Stinger competitor in reality, or a value option for those that don't need the brand and are willing to cross-shop it versus a Lexus or a Genesis or perhaps something like an Audi. That's going to be very, very compelling. But my concern is that now Mazda 6 is solidly a Camry and Accord competitor, and when we get the new 22 Mazda 6, the rear-wheel drive layout, especially if it's going to have an inline 6, is probably going to mean a cramped back seat. And the Mazda 6 is already a little small on the inside. Unless they can pull a rabbit out of their hat, I'm a little bit worried that it may be too small inside. So moving along here, would the auto cycle be banned or phased out in favor of Atkinson cycle for future fuel economy and emission standards? It's unlikely. Remember the way that emission standards work in the US and in most countries out there, you are allowed a much more polluting engine at full throttle. So we may see more engines coming like Toyota and Hyundai have, where they can operate on the auto cycle or the Atkinson cycle. They can switch between the two. And remember that the Atkinson cycle is just a variant of the auto cycle as well. It's not a true Atkinson cycle. Basically, what they're just doing is leaving the intake valve open a little bit longer so that way some of the air can escape. That's effectively changed the ratio of compression to power stroke in the engine, and as a result has improved the efficiency at some measure. And to a large extent, there are a decent number of engines out there that will do slight variants of this. They're not as aggressive as some of Hyundai and Toyota's engine designs, but a lot of engines out there will do that to improve overall efficiency. So I think we'll see more of that as time goes on. But whether we will see no auto cycle engines, I don't see. Remember that when it comes to fuel economy standards, manufacturers are allowed to basically compensate. So FCA has a lot of big engines because they buy credits from Tesla, and that allows them to continue producing big engines without getting fined. Mercedes has a whole ton of new small engined fuel efficient vehicles with dual clutch transmissions. That's how they can get away with the bigger, more polluting vehicles. And then, of course, Mercedes pays the fines because they can afford it. So until we see the fines going away, or we see some of these quota systems change so that way you can no longer trade credits with another manufacturer, I don't think we're going to see any major changes there. Let's see here. So moving along here. In Europe, CHR actually comes, yes, with the hybrid powertrains from the new Corolla. What do you think the reason behind no hybrids in the US? The main reason is price. So the CHR is targeted at a much lower price point, theoretically, than the CHR is targeted at in Europe. And that's the main reason that we don't see the hybrids there. Let's see here. Why are Japanese auto brands so resistant to implement lithium-ion battery cars? This is an incredibly complicated question here, but thanks for asking here. So there are two components here. So the first reason that we don't see lithium-ion batteries in many Toyota hybrids is simply reliability. So in general terms, nickel metal hydride batteries, based on the formulations for nickel metal hydride batteries that we see in cars, mind you, have better power dissipation characteristics and better cold weather and hot weather performance compared to lithium-ion batteries within the use envelopes that we see in modern hybrids. So generally speaking, unless packaging is a big concern, and this is part of why we see the Prius, the RAV4 hybrid, etc., using nickel metal hydride batteries, packaging is not a concern. We see nickel metal technology there for those low weather performance use cycles, etc. There's also cost. Nickel metal hydride batteries are less expensive. It's a proven technology. They have proven that they can warrant them very repeatably for a long period of time. They easily adapt to air-cooled systems rather than liquid-cooled systems like we see in most lithium-ion vehicles out there. It just is a very solid, very stable technology. And in those vehicles, there's not necessarily a reason to use lithium-ion batteries. So lithium-ion batteries may produce slightly higher fuel economy scores. You may get a slightly better power dissipation technology or slightly better power dissipation rate from a lithium-ion battery, but it's not going to improve things enough to warrant the extra cost. Now, when it comes to battery electric vehicles, that all has to do with the way that Toyota and Honda see fuel efficiency and emissions in a holistic way. And I've talked about this before. If you actually cared about global emissions, then you would not make any battery electric vehicles yet. So if you cared about new car vehicle emissions globally in the US and North America and Japan, etc., nobody would be making a pure battery electric vehicle. And the big reason for that is that battery supplies are low in the world right now. So we cannot mine enough cobalt. Lithium mining and lithium separation from salt water, etc., is not at the capacity where we need it to be. The production capacity for lithium-ion batteries is not where we need it to be to create enough battery electric vehicles to make that difference. So this also comes down to some of the more altruistic concerns about battery electric versus plug-in versus hybrid, etc. So taking a look at this, if you had only the ability to make 100 kilowatt hours of battery, say, you could build one long-range battery electric vehicle. You could build one Porsche Taycan. You could build one Model S, one Model X. You could build half of a Rivian pickup truck because that battery is absolutely enormous. Or you could build 11 plug-in Priuses or 11 Hyundai Ioniq plugins that could give you 25 to 29 miles of electric range. And this is where it comes down to the cold turkey versus gasoline reduction. So if you buy a battery electric vehicle, you could go cold turkey, and you could take your consumption of gasoline in, say, a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla from 500 gallons a year to 0. But that means that there are still going to be 10 Corollas out there that are burning 5,000 gallons a year collectively between them all. Now, what if instead you could create and sell 11 Prius Primes rather than one Model X and 9 Corollas? Then you would reduce that gasoline consumption from 5,000 gallons a year down to about 500 gallons a year. So you've had a massive reduction in gasoline consumption, whereas just having that one EV out there, you've actually had a relatively minor reduction in gasoline consumption. It's all in that math. Now, the ultimate problem with that is efficiency is not sexy. A Prius Prime and a plug-in Ioniq are just not as much fun as a Model 3. But if you're looking at this from an actual care about environment perspective, then you want more plug-in hybrid vehicles out there. You want more hybrid vehicles out there. And you honestly, at this point, do not want full battery electric vehicles out there. The battery electric vehicle technology could be important at some point in the future, but at this point in time, with the available resources that we have globally, it makes more sense to produce more plug-in hybrids and more hybrid hybrids. It's also worth noting that you would have an even bigger impact on overall gasoline consumption if instead of the one battery electric vehicle or the 11 plug-in vehicles, instead of that, you took those batteries and made 100 hybrids. And that is exactly what we see, for instance, at Toyota. So the RAV4, for instance, 25% of all Toyota RAV4 models right now are hybrids, and they're getting 40 miles per gallon. So that means that the people that have bought those RAV4s over buying another compact crossover have cut their gasoline consumption in half. And that has a massive impact on overall fuel economy, a much bigger impact than if Toyota had gone out and produced, that'd be 100 and something thousand RAV4 hybrids. With that same number of battery packs, they could have produced 1,000 battery electric vehicles. And that would have had a much lower impact on emissions, on energy independence, however you want to look at it. If you're a conservative person and you don't care about the environment or climate change at all, it still has an impact on your pocketbook. Fuel economy equals lower cost of operation, and fuel economy also increases energy independence. So if everybody out there was driving a RAV4 hybrid rather than whatever they were driving, we would have enough domestic oil production for everybody. So moving along from there, Jack's asking, any info on the 2021 Acura MDX? Is it going to be redesigned? Is there a release date? At this point in time, the 2021 MDX, we fully expect to be exactly the same as the 2020 MDX. Everything seems to be getting pushed out quite a lot. The RDX just got launched not that long ago. The next model to be redesigned is going to be the TLX, most likely. And then after that, we're going to see the MDX possibly getting redesigned. But my bet would be on it being a 2022 at this point in time. Let's see here. Thoughts on Tesla's regen braking scheme versus Toyota's scheme? And I totally understand why people don't like the brake pedal feel, especially when you favor curvy road. Okay, well, this is tricky. So, um, the honest reason why Tesla has the regen braking done the way that they do on their cars is because it's expensive to do blended regen right. That's just to be perfectly frank. Tesla does not do blended regen. So when you put your foot on the brake pedal, you get X amount of regen, and it will not vary based on the pressure or the travel of your foot on the brake pedal. It's just on or it's off. And it's on or off in two different levels, high or low. There's no in between. And there's also no true coasting feature. So I always find it interesting and hilarious that people say they like the one pedal driving thing on the Tesla when it is not a one pedal driving thing. If you really want an EV with a one pedal driving thing, you'll find that in the Nissan Leaf. You will not find that in a Tesla. Tesla gets close, mind you, but it's not one pedal driving. It also does not have terribly aggressive regen braking. The regen braking, for instance, in the Porsche Taycan can send so much more power into the battery than the Teslas. It's mind-blowing, actually, how much power they can stuff back in that battery, how rapidly they can do that. But it's expensive to do that right. And this is an area where Toyota does not honestly do a very good job. It is better in the RAV4 that we have, the RAV4 hybrid, and it is still a little bit better in the new Highlander hybrid that we have up in the driveway right now. But Toyota's blended regen feel is still not as good as Honda's. I think Honda does probably the best job in the mainstream segment as far as hybrid regen feel. A lot of that has to do with the way that the Honda hybrid system is designed, the two-motor system. And even Hyundai's is a little bit better than Toyota's. But the big reason here is that you have to have all these algorithms about how brake pedal and stopping force interact with one another, and transitions between regen braking and friction braking if you're going to go from a moderate braking event to a heavy braking event. And if you simply don't blend, if you're lazy and you don't blend them at all, then that's easier. I would not be surprised if over time Tesla changed that and they ended up giving us a blended braking system in future Tesla models. There are a ton of Tesla things that they claimed were sacred that they're violating all the time. Like they claimed that heat pumps were terrible and that we were never going to have heat pumps. And it looks like, the Model Y has a heat pump, and it looks like the rest of the Tesla lineup will eventually have a heat pump as well, because heat pumps are simply better. And it's a cost thing. It was entirely a cost thing that they didn't do that initially. We also see them being very dedicated to cylindrical cells now, but the rumor mill is that we do see Tesla testing, flat prismatic packs that are flat and a little bit easier to package, easier to cool, more reliably, more consistently. Honestly, everybody said that prismatic packs were better than cylindrical packs. Except Tesla, except that Tesla's probably also going to be using them. So there we go. When the Highlander hybrid video will be live, been looking forward to full video review for some time. So Matthew, we should probably have that video out. My guess would be in about 2 to 3 weeks. We're prioritizing that over some of the other videos that we have going on. But we do have a ton of vehicles. We're trying to get at least 3 videos out a week, and so that's putting us a little bit behind. But hopefully we will try and get that out as soon as possible. Let's see here. Tourist is saying, I've read that Corolla hatch has had major issues with the CVT. Is this something that matters? 20K is by far the biggest purchase I've made, and I'd hate to have transmission issues 5 years from now. That is an interesting question. We don't know yet exactly what that transmission's reliability will be, because it is a brand new transmission design. And remember that when you're taking a look at historic Corolla reliability measures, that you cannot take a look at previous generations of the Corolla and apply it to the Corolla hatch, because it's an all-new model. Same as you can't apply it to the new Corolla sedan, because it's an all-new model. Now, if I were to bet, I would bet that, generally speaking, Toyota reliability should be, on average, above other brands in that segment. Most likely, it will be above the Honda Civic in some small measure, but we can't say that for sure at the moment. And we do know that some of Toyota's first generation CVTs did have certain issues that they then later resolved. But in general, I would say that that's a safe bet. If you want to be absolutely sure, then I would say stick with the model that has a more proven reliability track record in that segment at the moment. We do know a little bit more, for instance, about how Honda's CVT is holding out. So that may be a good option to look at. If you are planning on keeping your car less than 100,000 miles, you may want to also consider something from the Hyundai Kia Motor Group, because they do have a very long powertrain warranty. So that would be worth taking a peek at. Potato Canyon, thanks for joining us. And thanks to Bill for sending us a $5 super chat there. I want to shout you guys out. Someone's asking here, will Hyundai be the new Toyota and Honda? That is an interesting question, Daryl. I would not be surprised if Hyundai turned out to be the new Honda. I'm not entirely clear that they're going to be the new Toyota yet. We'll see how that goes. Toyota is less willing to take risks than Hyundai, I would say, is the difference there. And Honda has, generally speaking, been a little bit more willing to take risks engineering-wise, and performance-wise as well. And we definitely see that same dedication to performance, newfound, I should say, dedication to performance within the Hyundai line as well. We have their new N line of vehicles. We have sport trims of their vehicles. We see within the Kia envelope their new GT lines, etc. The rumor mill has it that we will be seeing the N line Sonata very soon. Hopefully drive it before the end of the year, and that there will be also an equivalent GT trim of the Kia Optima. So those should be really interesting there. Moving along here, AF is asking, why don't they put solar panels on roofs and trunks to help charge electric vehicle batteries? Cost is the primary reason for that one. So, we do see solar panels on the new Sonata Hybrid available in the very top end trim. We don't know what the cost of that option is, however, because it's wrapped into that top trim and it's not a separately purchasable option. But based on cost per watt, it's likely that the basic solar panels in that vehicle are costing probably about $200 to $300. They are LG Chem solar panels, which are among the more expensive available right now. The LG Chem solar panels I just bought recently myself were about $1 per watt. But remember that these are automotive grade panels, so their design envelope is going to be broader and more robust than panels on a house. It also appears that there is tempered glass on top of them to help protect them from hail, from rock chips, etc. So my guess is it could be as high as $2 a watt for those specialty panels. And that is incrementally a kind of an expensive charge for a new car. Most manufacturers, to handle the research and development, everything else involved in integrating that kind of feature with a new car, would at least double the feature cost, if not triple it. So would anybody be willing to pay $800 to $1,000 for a solar roof option on their car? That could be tricky. I'm actually a little surprised that we don't see that option on a Tesla. I would love to see that option there, for two reasons. First, it would give me the option of a taller roof that did not bake my head in the sun. But it would also allow Teslas to run their Sentry mode much longer. Because if you could generate, say, 300 watts on the roof of your Model X or Model Y, I think that would be a decent trade-off for not having the glass roof. I would be willing to make that trade and be able to power your Sentry mode for an extra week, or an extra perhaps even 2 weeks longer than it already could. So that's my thought there. Moving along here to the next question. Let's scroll down here. How does one approach buying a used plug-in hybrid? Would a typical inspection be good enough? Ooh, that is an interesting question there. So plug-in hybrids, generally speaking, have the same concerns that you would with any used vehicle, any vehicle out there. Some folks are a little bit concerned about how degraded the battery might be over the lifetime of that vehicle. But remember, plug-in hybrids, especially the Volt, use a relatively limited section of the battery still. And that's part of why they have long warranties and seemingly good durability, especially the Volt. The Volt, I've never been a huge fan of the Volt for completely separate reasons. Efficiency is it's the ultimate compromised vehicle, really, but reliability has been good on the Volt, especially battery reliability. And I expect it to also be similarly high with any of the other plug-in hybrids out there because of the way that they're using that battery. So I wouldn't have the same considerations as a used battery electric vehicle with them. The other thing to keep in mind would be on some of the plug-in hybrids, very limited numbers. How often were they supercharged? This mainly applies to the Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid. As I recall, it's the only one with a DC fast charging port on it. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Let's see here. Move along to a new question here. Anything to note about Tesla reliability? It's really difficult to say, to be perfectly honest. Tesla reliability has not been great, let's be frank. How that has changed, we won't know, especially for newer models because they haven't been out long enough. And that is a very open-ended question. Generally speaking, there's less to go wrong in an electric vehicle, so that is something in their favor. It is telling, however, that Tesla has changed their tune in some areas, and we now see oil filters, for instance, in the new Model Y's transmission. Very logical there because all oil will break down over time. Anytime there's a gear set, and there are reduction gears there, you can have metal shavings come out. So one would logically assume that there will be a scheduled oil change interval for modern Teslas with their oil filters. We don't know what that interval will be. It's probably going to be long, but it still should be there. And this does tend to indicate that there was a reason for those oil filters to be placed there. So does that bode poorly for long-term Tesla owners? We don't know, to be perfectly honest. We do see some old Tesla models with engine issues and transmission issues, or motor issues rather, and transmission issues that have been either replaced under warranties or extended warranties or owner costs, etc. And I think that will continue to be a problem for them long term, but it's a little bit iffy. Let's see here. What kind of max range were we getting on our Soul EV before we returned it? We didn't really notice much of a loss in the Soul EV, which I was surprised by, honestly. It, when it was new, could go about 110 miles if you treated it very, very, very gently. By the time we got rid of it, our last long-range test in it was about 95 miles. So it lost about 15 to 20 miles of overall range, somewhere around there. Closer to 15, I think. That probably had to do with tire wear as well as battery degradation. We did use the entire battery relatively frequently, in my opinion, on that vehicle. And it was an air-cooled battery, so it active air-cooled, but still air-cooled nonetheless. And that's probably why all the modern Kia and Hyundai vehicles are water-cooled. So let's see here, moving on here. Why doesn't Honda invest more in Acura like Hyundai with Genesis? Genesis feels more like a first tier, while Acura feels like second tier. Available cash is the big reason there. Honda is unquestionably a profitable company, but Honda tends not to build things that are unprofitable. They want their return on investment an awful lot closer to its original design date, so they don't like that theory of blowing money. And Hyundai just has deeper pockets. Remember, Hyundai doesn't just build cars. Hyundai builds everything. And Honda is not a massive vertically integrated machine like Toyota to a large extent, or Hyundai to an enormous extent. And so Hyundai has a lot of cash to pull on and throw into a project like Genesis. And they're definitely willing to have Genesis be some kind of crown jewel that elevates brand perception, but doesn't necessarily make money. Let's put it that way. Naveen is asking, what does it mean when seats are comfortable? Blah, blah, blah. Everything factors into seat comfort, and seat comfort is a personal preference, so that's always something to keep in mind. But The more adjustable a seat is, the wider audience it will have as far as seat comfort. So the more ways you can adjust the lumbar, the more ways the seat tilts and turns and adjusts and contorts, the more likely the average consumer is going to be to find an ideal driving position. So, especially important is seat bottom tilt, seat bottom height, articulation of the seat back, adjustability of lumbar support. That's why we find four-way lumbar in so many new vehicles, etc. Four-way adjustable headrests obviously is important as well as decent ranges of motion for tilt and telescopic steering columns. So that way, if you're a very short person, or you're a very tall person, or you're a wider person, or a skinnier person, you can find the right position in the seat for you. So that's mainly what goes in there. Let's see here. Would a Nero EV be a better buy than a Model Y? Ooh, that is a tricky question. I would say unquestionably it's better value. Is it a better car? That's a tricky question. It's definitely not going to be faster. It's not going to handle as well. It's not going to have the high-end options that you'll see. It's not going to be as flashy. It's not going to have the brand. It's not going to charge as fast. All those things definitely go into it. But unquestionably, I think any of the mainstream EVs is going to be a better value than the Model Y, and that's the key thing there. Let's see here. Moving on here. Too big to fail saying many of the Japanese brands have deep pockets thanks to baking. I mean, that definitely plays into it as well, but Nissan and Honda certainly do not have as deep of pockets as Toyota and Hyundai, for sure. Toyota definitely has deep pockets there. And one thing also to keep in mind with Nissan is that rather unfortunately, those deep pockets have been taxed very severely with their, acquisition/forced acquisition of Mitsubishi. The rumor mill basically says that the Japanese government really, really, really wanted Nissan to buy Mitsubishi, and that if Nissan knew what was good for them, they would buy Mitsubishi. But that was good for Mitsubishi, good for the Japanese economy, not really so great for Nissan, to be honest. Let's see here. Other than Tesla, which auto manufacturer has the best long-distance EV-centered navigation? Ooh, that is a good question. The Ford promises to have that same level of anticipation as far as EV range, etc. But let's see here. Aside from Ford, it's really nobody yet. The new cars promise that they will have that, but how well it will work, we don't know. I've seen the technical demos and some of the dog and pony shows for the Ford system, and it looks like it will be incredibly similar to what Tesla has done, but we won't know till we drive it. Let's put it that way. Let's see here. The 181 horsepower rating on the Accord and CR-V traction motors, the peak or continuous rating. Apparently, 166 horsepower last generation motor actually put down 175 to the wheels during dyno tests. According to Honda, the traction motor, that is the peak rating. This is a tricky thing. It is both peak and continuous because they are one and the same. So the motor is capable of delivering 181 horsepower maximum and also 181 horsepower all the time. That's theoretically what's going on there. And that number appears to be pretty accurate. And the reason we know that is when we take a look at some of the performance scores versus similarly powerful vehicles in the segment. So Camry hybrid versus Accord hybrid, RAV4 hybrid versus CR-V hybrid. The Toyota products are definitely a little bit speedier, even though the combined horsepower rating on the Honda system is theoretically higher. Now, some of this falls into how Honda has chosen to define maximum horsepower. And this is tricky. So I had an extraordinarily long conversation with a bunch of the hybrid system engineers at Honda not that long ago, about a month ago. Well, maybe 2 months ago now. And they did not disagree with the characterization in our hybrid Honda video that is up on the channel that you can see. But they also pushed back on some of the definition and the line that you will never experience 212 system horsepower. And here is the tricky bit there. So they're saying that the peak 212 horsepower happens when the engine is producing peak horsepower at 6,200 RPM approximately, and you are pulling the maximum power that can be pulled out of the battery, and then you're sending that along to the electric motor. Now, the trouble is here, in this instance, that engine is producing whatever it's producing, and then the battery is dissipating the rest, but the engine then has to send that through a motor generator unit, produce power, and then send it along to the electric motor that's connected to the wheels. And the electric motor that's connected to the wheels can only ever make 181 horsepower. That's all it will ever make. So, well, they are correct in saying that the system generally, and overall, can produce 212 horsepower. It cannot apply that 212 horsepower to the road. It can only apply 181 horsepower to the road through the reduction gear set. And Honda's logic here is, they say, well, that's okay, and it's an okay characterization because all vehicles have drivetrain loss. And so even though we have 212 horsepower over here, 181 horsepower over here, and then some number of horsepower after the reduction gear set, we're going to call this all acceptable drivetrain loss. The trouble I have with that is that we, generally speaking, in modern vehicles do not have a 20% loss in power between engine and wheels. It just doesn't happen anymore. Most vehicles out there, especially modern vehicles with aggressive lockup torque converters and high efficiency gear sets and high efficiency oils, do not have that level of loss between engine and transmission. And it's especially true in vehicles with dual clutch transmissions, where according to, and mind you, we are combining all kinds of hybrid numbers here. But according to Hyundai, for instance, the theoretical parasitic loss between engine and drive wheels in an ionic hybrid is 5%. So that is considerably less than we see in the Honda hybrid system. And according to Toyota, the theoretical loss between the engine and the drive wheels is somewhere in the nebulous region of perhaps 8%. A little bit tricky to say. Either way, definitely less than 20%. So that is a little bit tricky. Anyway, moving along here. The sink in the background, yes, this is, again, the guest room, so there's a sink there so that way guests can brush their teeth and drink water. So let's see here. Last question, and I unfortunately have to say we do have to cut off because I promised this would only be an hour, and I'm also running out of batteries since I forgot a whole bunch of cables here in my rush to get down here and do the video. So explaining my technical background on cars. Unlike Jason Fensky, who is a good friend, I do not have an engineering degree because math was not my forte. And so I started out in electrical engineering. I come from a family of engineers. Most people in my family have engineering degrees. My mom's a biologist. I've always been interested in things like that, so always, worked on taking cars apart, etc. And I've definitely worked in technical fields before. Was an IT person for quite a while. And so that's basically where a lot of that comes from, and then just willing to do a lot of research. So that's basically how that worked. And then I will have to actually just use one last question here, just because this is intriguing to me. The why batteries and hybrids don't use the battery for heating. The big reason that we don't use batteries, and I'm assuming you're talking about two things. A, using residual heat from the battery for heating, and B would be using the battery to run some sort of heater. The big reason we don't use the battery for heating the cabin as far as waste heat is that there just isn't enough waste heat going on. Even if you're using your battery heavily, the battery doesn't really produce much heat at all. And in fact, this is why in battery electric vehicles in cold weather, we see such a precipitous loss in range, because not only do those battery electric vehicles have to heat the cabin in cold weather, they have to heat the battery, because the battery being discharged to drive the vehicle forward does not actually produce enough heat to keep itself warm, let alone heat the cabin. So there's just not enough waste heat going on there. And the big reason that we don't see batteries being used to heat the cabin as far as resistive element heaters is, generally speaking, efficiency. Now, there are hybrids out there that have auxiliary heaters that in low, really cold weather situations where the engine is not producing enough heat, that can happen with an efficient engine design. They have auxiliary heaters. Or we have plug-in hybrids. See, Potato Cannon just noticed that. Potato Prius uses the exact here. It's a tiny heater, again, because it's just there to help out. It's not there to replace the engine. But because because engines in these ultra-efficient hybrid vehicles produce so little heat, really, they need to have electric cooling pumps so they don't overcool themselves. They need to have active grill shutters, etc., to help preserve heat there, to get the engine and the exhaust system up to operating temperature as quickly as possible, and also to help produce heat in the cabin. Someone's also asking coordination with this friction in the axles, spinning wheels. There's not enough heat there either. Heating a cabin in a vehicle requires a lot of heat. Instead, we're talking kilowatts of heat here. So, for instance, the average small house can comfortably keep the interior of the home warm, even in a 1,000 square foot house with, say, 3,000 watts of heat. That should be able to keep a house at a reasonable temperature, unless the temperature is pretty cold. But in a car, you're talking about a metal box that's driving down the road with a lot of air moving around, a lot of air leaks. You're pulling in fresh air from outside that's cold, etc. It requires a lot of energy to heat the cabin, and there's just not enough energy going on in these other sources in a battery electric vehicle. And that's why we have heat pumps, etc. And heat pumps, we do see some in hybrids, but it's a cost thing. So yes, in a hybrid, a heat pump would be efficient, but you have the engine there already and it's already running. So you just might as well use the waste heat from the engine. But on the other hand, that's why we see them in some plug-in hybrids like the Prius Prime, because the engine isn't running, and therefore you want the maximum range out of the vehicle in those cold weather situations, so we use a heat pump. We also see heat pumps being used in fuel cell vehicles because of its efficiency rating. A heat pump, remember, is simply moving heat from one side to the other. It is not creating new heat. It's a gas expansion principle process, operates essentially like air conditioning in reverse. So it's pulling heat from outside and delivering it to the inside of the cabin. And they can be 200 to 300 to 400% efficient depending on the temperature ranges that we're talking about. For instance, the heat pump that's on my home right now is 500% efficient, and its lowest efficiency rating on the scale yields 300% efficiency at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still producing 3 times more heat than you would ever get in a resistive element heater. And theoretically, even if you go all the way down to the minimum point of operation for a heat pump system, the lowest they would ever really go is about 100% efficiency. So with that out of the way, I will see all of you next week. Thanks to everybody that has super chatted and all those other things and joined the channel. Remember, you can find merch down there. We have some entertaining shirts, that you can find there on our Teespring. You can donate to Feeding America. You can donate to this channel if you want to. And we will see all of you next week. Bye.